The wind bit at Elias's face, a constant sharp reminder of the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. He'd been alone for so long, the silence of the vast, snow-covered land, a heavy cloak around him. His cabin, a small wooden box against the endless white, was his only refuge. For years, his life had been a cycle of hunting, trapping, and surviving. He was a man of few words, his thoughts his only companions, his actions guided by the harsh laws of nature. The only thing that mattered was staying alive, and for that he needed a wife, not for love, but for survival. A partner to help with the chores, to mend clothes, to keep the loneliness at bay. The idea had been a long time coming. He knew of an Inuit community a few days' journey away. Their customs were different, their lives intertwined with the rhythm of the land in a way he, a white man, could never truly grasp. He had heard of a widow, Nanook, a woman known for her strength and resilience. She had lost her husband to a blizzard and was now struggling to provide for her young son. Elias saw an opportunity, a transaction of sorts. He would offer a prize he had been saving for years, the magnificent pelt of a Kodiak bear, a trophy of his greatest hunt. He knew it was a valuable gift, one that would guarantee the family's survival through the brutal winter. The journey to the village was long and arduous. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and frozen earth, and the sky a brilliant cold blue. When he arrived, the village was a cluster of sod and driftwood homes, smoke curling from their chimneys like wisps of ghosts. The villagers watched him with quiet suspicion, their faces etched with a lifetime of battling the elements. He met with Nanook, her gaze direct and unwavering. She was older than he had imagined, her face weathered by the sun and wind, her eyes holding a deep sorrow he couldn't quite understand. He laid the bear pelt at her feet, a silent offering. She looked at the pelt, then at him, her expression unreadable. After a long silence, she nodded, accepting his proposal. The marriage was arranged. It wasn't a celebration, but a solemn agreement between two people bound by the same harsh world. He didn't know then that this decision would be the turning point of his life. He saw a transaction, a solution to his loneliness and Nanook's struggle. He didn't see the depth of her resolve, the fire in her heart, or the purpose that drove her. He was about to learn that in this land, a promise made was a debt to be collected, and Nanook had a debt to settle, a debt he was now a part of. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, a temporary warmth before the long, cold night. The weight of his rifle, a constant companion, felt different now. He was no longer just a hunter. He was a husband, a stranger, in a strange land, married to a woman whose true intentions were still a mystery. Don't miss the rest of this journey. Subscribe to the channel to follow the story of Elias and Nanook. The wedding night was a stark contrast to any Elias had ever imagined. There was no joy, no celebration. The small, crowded hut was filled with the quiet rustling of blankets and the steady breathing of Nanook's son, Aputi, who slept soundly on the other side of the room. Aputi was a young boy with his mother's dark, penetrating eyes, and he had looked at Elias with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The air was thick with the smell of dried fish and burning whale oil. Elias sat on a fur blanket, his rifle leaning against the wall, its familiar shape a source of comfort in the unfamiliar surroundings. Nanook sat opposite him, her back straight, her face a mask of stone. She hadn't spoken a word to him since the agreement, her silence more unnerving than any anger or sadness. The silence was a language in itself, speaking of distrust and a deep-seated reservation. Elias felt like an intruder, a foreign object in a world that was not his own. He was used to the silence of the wilderness, a quiet that spoke of the natural order of things. This was different. This silence was heavy, loaded with unspoken history and a grief he could only guess at. He looked at her, really looked at her. for the first time. The light from the oil lamp cast dancing shadows on her face, highlighting the subtle scars from a life lived on the edge. Her hands, resting on her lap, were strong and calloused, the hands of a woman who had worked tirelessly to survive. He thought of the bear pelt, a symbol of his power and prowess. He had given it to her as a solution, a means to an end. He realized now that she saw it differently. To her, it was a debt, a transaction she was obligated to fulfill. He was about to lie down when she moved. It was a swift, fluid motion, a predator's grace. Before he could react, she was at his side, her hand wrapping around the barrel of his rifle. He instinctively reached for it, his mind racing. Was she going to hurt him? A cold dread washed over him, but she wasn't pointing it at him. She was simply taking it. Her eyes met his, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something other than sorrow or resignation. It was a fierce, unwavering determination. "You have given me a new life for my son," she said, her voice a low murmur, the first words she had spoken to him. "And you have given him a father, but you will not hunt with this any more." Elias was stunned. He watched as she took the rifle, a tool that was an extension of his own identity, and moved to the corner of the hut, where she laid it down next to a small, worn bow and a quiver of arrows. She returned to her place, the silence returning, heavier now, filled with a new kind of tension. He had offered her a bear pelt, a symbol of his power. She had taken his rifle, a symbol of his independence. The transaction was no longer what it seemed. The terms had been changed, and he was no longer in control. The long night stretched before him, and for the first time in his life, Elias was truly afraid. He had entered a world of unspoken rules, and he had just broken the first one. The following days were a lesson in humility for Elias. Stripped of his rifle, he felt exposed, vulnerable. The land that he had always seen as a challenge to be conquered now seemed to mock him. Nanook had taken his most prized possession, the tool he had trusted above all else, and had given him a traditional Inuit bow and a set of arrows. The bow was a beautifully crafted piece of wood and sinew, but it felt alien in his hands. He was a hunter of long-range shots, of silent ambushes. This new tool demanded a different kind of skill, a closeness to his prey that he had long forgotten. He was forced to learn a new way of seeing, of moving, of listening to the land. Nanook, on the other hand, was a master of this world. She moved with a silent grace, her footsteps barely disturbing the snow. She taught him to read the tracks of animals, not just for what they were, but for where they were going and what they were feeling. She showed him how to build a trap that was an extension of the land, not an intrusion. He was a novice, a clumsy student in a school where a single mistake could mean starvation. He was also a stranger in the village. The villagers, once suspicious, were now openly hostile. They saw him as an outsider, a man who had taken one of their own, and his clumsy attempts at their traditions were a source of quiet mockery. His only allies were Nanook and Aputi. Aputi, the boy, was a silent observer. He watched Elias with a quiet intensity, his young mind trying to make sense of this new, strange man who was now his father. He was a son of the land, a boy who knew the rhythm of the seasons and the secrets of the animals. He taught Elias how to carve bone and stone, how to make a fishing spear, how to listen for the sound of ice cracking on a distant lake. In these moments, Elias saw a flicker of the man he used to be. A man who respected the land, not just used it. He began to see Nanook not just as a wife he had acquired, but as a teacher, a guide in a world he had only pretended to know. Her silence, once a source of dread, was now a form of communication. It spoke of patience, of wisdom, of a deep respect for the world around them. He realized that his rifle, a symbol of his superiority, was in fact a barrier. It had separated him from the land, allowing him to take from it without truly understanding it. The bow, on the other hand, demanded a connection. It required him to get close, to feel the breath of the animal, to understand its life before taking it. He began to see the world through Nanook's eyes, a world of intricate connections and delicate balances. He saw the struggle of the caribou, the silent patience of the wolf, the fierce love of a mother bear. He was no longer a hunter. He was a part of the cycle. And in the quiet of the night, with the wind howling outside and the warmth of the small hut a fragile comfort, he looked at Nanook, her face serene in the lamplight, and for the first time he felt something other than fear or discomfort. He felt a flicker of respect, a small, fragile seed of something that could one day grow into love. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, Elias's respect for Nanook deepened. She was a force of nature, a provider, a protector, and a teacher. Her hands, once a source of fear for him, were now a source of wonder. They could skin a seal with surgical precision or mend a tear in a parka with delicate grace. She was a master of her environment, a true survivor. Aputi, too, began to open up to him. The bright, curious boy would listen for hours to Nanook's stories of their people and the wisdom of the elders. Elias listened as well, a silent observer in a world of ancient traditions. He saw the respect and love the boy had for his mother, and a new feeling began to stir in his heart, a feeling of inadequacy, a realization that he had so much to learn, so much to prove. He wanted to be a man worthy of their respect and their family. One day, a brutal storm hit the village. Snow fell in blinding sheets, and the wind howled. The villagers huddled in their homes, their food supplies dwindling. The fear of starvation became a tangible reality. Elias, no longer a stranger, was expected to do his part. With Nanook and 2 other hunters, he ventured out into the storm on a desperate hunt. The cold bit at his bones, but he persevered, driven by a new purpose, the survival of his new family and his community. They found a small herd of caribou huddled against the wind. It was a treacherous hunt. The other hunters used their spears, but Elias, with his new skills, used his bow. He moved with quiet grace, the bow an extension of his body. He remembered Nanook's lessons of patience and respect. His arrow flew true, and the caribou fell. The hunt was a success. They returned to the village, their sleds laden with meat, their faces etched with exhaustion, but their hearts filled with a quiet triumph. For the first time, the villagers looked at Elias not with suspicion, but with respect. He had proven himself. He had become one of them. Thank you for watching. If you're enjoying the story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more chapters. The successful hunt brought a brief moment of peace and a sense of belonging for Elias. The villagers' hostility thawed, replaced by a cautious respect. They saw him as a hunter who had braved the storm and provided for the community. The fear of starvation receded, and the village returned to its quiet rhythm. Elias found a new kind of peace. He was no longer just surviving. He was living, a part of something bigger than himself. He had a purpose, a family, and a community to protect. He began to learn their language and found a new way to communicate, not just with words, but with shared meals and the quiet camaraderie of men who faced the same brutal world. Nanook, too, seemed to change. The stone mask she had worn for so long began to crack. Her face, once a canvas of silent sorrow, now held a faint, almost imperceptible smile. She would watch him as he played with Aputi, her eyes filled with a quiet affection. She began to tell him stories of her husband, a great hunter whom she had loved fiercely. Elias listened, his heart aching with a strange mixture of jealousy and respect. He realized that the bear pelt was not just a transaction, it was a ghost, a reminder of a life she had lost. He had not just married a widow, he had married a memory, and he was now living with a ghost. One evening, Nanook told Elias of her husband's last hunt. He had been tracking a massive polar bear, a beast that had been terrorizing the village. He never returned, swallowed by a blizzard, his body never found. The bear, however, had reappeared, bringing a new kind of fear. Elias's heart pounded as he realized the bear pelt he had offered was not just a symbol of his power, but a symbol of his blindness. He had seen a trophy. Nanook had seen a reminder of her loss. The story was no longer just about a lonely hunter and a widowed woman. It was about a promise, a debt, and a bear that was still out there, a ghost of a hunter and a symbol of a past he had to face. The conversation with Nanook had been a turning point. The ghost of her husband was now a tangible presence. Elias felt its weight and the unspoken expectation that he should somehow avenge him. He realized the rifle wasn't about distrust. It was about respect. Her husband had hunted with a bow and spear, a testament to his connection to the land. Elias's rifle was a symbol of a different world, and by taking it, Nanook had asked him to become a man worthy of her husband's memory. With the return of the sun, a new danger emerged. The polar bear that had haunted Nanook's family was spotted again, a massive, scarred beast, a living legend. The village was on edge, and Elias was now expected to join the hunt as a rite of passage. Nanook, however, was against it. She saw the danger, having lost one husband to the bear. She argued with the elders, but they were adamant. The bear was a threat that had to be stopped. Elias was torn between his desire to prove himself and his growing love for Nanook. He saw the raw fear in her eyes and knew he didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to be a husband and a father. He made his decision. He would join the hunt, but on his own terms. He would not use the bow and spear. He would use his rifle, not as a symbol of independence, but as a tool for protection. He would face the bear for survival, not glory. He would honor her husband's memory by protecting the family he had left behind. He knew Nanook would be furious, but he also knew this was a battle he had to fight, not for himself, but for her. The decision to reclaim his rifle was born of a love deeper than he had ever thought possible. He had seen the fear in Nanook's eyes and felt a primal need to protect her and Aputi. He knew the traditional hunt was a dangerous gamble, a risk he was no longer willing to take. His rifle, a symbol of his past, was now a tool for his future. He would use it to ensure he returned home, to ensure Nanook would not mourn another husband. He approached her in their hut and told her of his decision. He expected anger, but she simply nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. She walked to the corner, picked up his rifle and handed it to him. "Be safe," she whispered, a silent plea. The hunt was a solemn affair. The men of the village, their faces grim, gathered at the edge of the village, hunting not just a bear, but a ghost. Elias, his rifle slung over his shoulder, felt its weight not as a burden but as a responsibility. He was not just a hunter, he was a husband, a father, a protector. He was a part of their world. They found the polar bear near the frozen coast, a magnificent creature but also a killer. The hunt was tense and silent. Elias, with his rifle, took a position on a rocky outcrop, his aim steady. The other hunters moved in with their bows and spears. With one clean shot, Elias ended the struggle. The ghost of Nanook's husband was finally at rest. The men looked at Elias with new respect. He had not just slain a bear, he had honored a memory, protected a community, and come home to his wife and son. He had faced his own loneliness and found a new kind of family. He had come to this land alone, but he had become a husband, a father, a man who had found his place in the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see the rest of this amazing story unfold. The bear hunt marked a definitive end to Elias's old life. The villagers, once wary, now treated him as one of their own. His name was spoken with respect, and the fear that had gripped the community was gone. Elias, in turn, felt a deep sense of belonging he had never experienced. His isolation was a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of shared meals and the laughter of a putti. The boy, who had once been so reserved, now ran to Elias with a joyful cry. Their relationship was a blend of two worlds, sharing knowledge and respect. Nanook watched them, her face no longer shadowed by sadness, but lit by a gentle smile. She had found a new kind of love, a new chapter for her future. Elias began to learn more about the Inuit way of life, not just as a hunter, but as a member of the community. He learned their traditions and their deep-seated connection to the land, realizing it was not something to be conquered, but to be respected. Survival was not just about strength, but about community, about helping each other. He was no longer a man who had come to survive. He was a man who had come to live. The long winter passed, and with the coming of spring, the land began to stir. Elias and Nanook, their love a quiet, steady flame, watched the world come alive. They were no longer just a hunter and a widow, bound by a transaction, but a husband and wife, bound by love and a shared future. The lonely hunter had finally found his home, not in a cabin, but in the heart of a community. The seasons brought a profound transformation to Elias. The isolated hunter, who once saw the world through the lens of survival, was now a man woven into the tapestry of a family and a community. He had traded his solitary existence for the vibrant sounds of village life. The rifle, once a symbol of his self-reliance, was now a tool for the community's needs. His days were a blend of old and new. He hunted with the other men and learned to mend nets and carve tools from bone. He was a student of the land, guided by Nanook and the elders, and was no longer an outsider but an integral part of the cycle of life. Nanook had also fully embraced this new life. The quiet sorrow that had once defined her was a distant memory. She was a woman in love, her strength tempered by a newfound joy. She and Elias were a partnership, a seamless blend of different worlds, facing challenges as a single unit. Their love story was one of quiet respect and shared hardship. The biggest joy for Elias was his relationship with a putti, who had found in him the father he had lost. Elias taught him about the stars from his old life, and a putti taught him the stories of his people. They were a family, two cultures united by affection. The lonely hunter was no more. In his place was a husband, a father, and a man who had finally found his place in the world. The years passed, like the turning of the seasons. Elias, now an elder, had learned the language, stories, and traditions of the Inuit people, passing them on to his children with Nanook. Their family was a living testament to the blending of two worlds. A putti was now a grown man and a respected hunter, a leader in the community. His own children would sit at Elias's feet, listening to stories of his past. The lonely hunter with a rifle and the woman who took his gun and gave him a new life. The bear Pelt, a symbol of their transaction, was a prized family possession, a reminder of their journey. One evening, as the northern lights danced in the sky, Elias and Nanook sat by the fire, their hands intertwined. They were old, their bodies tired, but their spirits were at peace. Elias looked at Nanook, her face serene in the firelight. He thought of the lonely man he had been, who had sought a wife for survival, but had found so much more: love, family, community, and a purpose that went far beyond his own existence. He leaned in and kissed her, a silent gesture of a love grown over a lifetime. He had come to this land with a rifle and had lost it, but in its place he had found something far more valuable. He was no longer the lonely hunter. He was Elias, a husband, a father, an elder, a man who had found his home in the heart of a woman and the soul of a land that had once seemed so foreign. He had come to the end of his journey, not alone, but surrounded by love. Thank you for watching this epic journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories.